Continuing education knows that at the end of the day, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we really listen to their needs, and we can offer them flexible options both within continuing education and across the campus.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us at the 78th Conference on World Affairs. My name is Melissa Reeve, and I am an author of the book Hyperadaptive: Rewiring the Enterprise to Become AI Native. I am an AI transformation consultant here in Boulder, Colorado. It's a pleasure to be here. For recording purposes, today is Thursday, April 16th, 2026. And it is 2 p.m. You are at the panel, Humanity and Innovation, Navigating Life in the Age of AI. Before we get started, I'd like to read the University of Colorado Boulder's Land Acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty, and their work. Educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge. Consulting and engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Thank you, and once again, welcome to CWA and today's discussion. We ask that all attendees remain respectful throughout the discussion and refrain from interruptions. Signs, banners, noisemakers, and other audible disruptions are not permitted and will result in those responsible being asked to leave the room. Please silence your phones. Time will be allotted for questions for our in-person audience. We will take your questions via handwritten note cards. Please raise your hand if you have a question. They're welcomed. And a producer will give you a note card and a pencil. Please print legibly. Then raise your hand when you have a completed card, and a producer will collect it and bring it to me. And now, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And I remind our audience that full speaker bios can be found online at the CWA website.
Hello, I'm Ken Liu. I'm a fiction writer and a technologist. I've been thinking about the question of how do you remain human in the age of AI really for a very long time, because science fiction authors tend to think about this sort of thing even before it becomes reality. It's just that now we're actually here, and the AI we have is not the AI we imagined, and so a lot of things are very interesting. There are lots of interesting questions, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion because I think I'll get to learn a lot from my fellow panelists and from all of you about what it means to remain human, or maybe even to change the definition of what it means to be human. So I'm looking forward to it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sheila Warren. It's funny, I recognize some of you from previous audiences, so it's really kind of a fun thing about day 3 here. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm so excited to engage with my fellow panelists and moderator. I am currently the chair of something called the Advanced AI Society, and we are looking at, again, humanization in the age of AI and the age of our digital lives becoming ever expansive. And in lieu of repeating a biography many of you have heard, I thought I would just tell you a story quickly about the moment that I kind of realized that the online and offline intermediation of our lives was very seamless, and that was very generational. And so it was during the pandemic, and my daughter, who at the time, to do the math on this, she was about 8 years old, I would think, and she was FaceTiming her friend, like she was calling one of her friends, because we let her do that younger than we thought we would, because we were all on lockdown, and playing a game at the same time. And I realized that they were literally chatting in the game, but they were playing at the same time. Like their little, she had her little figure with her cape and her unicorn she'd earned, her math game, it was a math game, of course, following along behind her. And they were also talking in the FaceTime in the corner with each other. So they were having these two streams of communication at the same time, and neither was more or less real to her. And it was this really incredibly important moment for me in the development of my career, because I kind of realized that any expectation I had, and even the ways that I, as a very online person, as somebody who's become digitally native, I'm actually what I call a crypto native person, because I was a very early adopter of that technology. My daughter had a totally different appreciation of what it meant to connect online and offline, and to her those things were really, really seamless, right? And seamless in ways that I still don't fully internalize because of just my age. So, like I say, I think this question is pressing for all of us. It's particularly pressing for our children. And I'm really excited to hear from everyone here today and have this conversation. So thank you.
I have spent 35 plus years of my career in high tech. I worked at Microsoft for more than 25. And since then, I have been on the board of directors for several PE-backed technology companies. And every single one of them is driving through their business with, their business is not AI, but they are incorporating and driving through the products that they are delivering and delivering those services through AI. And it has just been fascinating over the last couple of years to see this, how quickly this has overtaken the language of what everybody is talking about and trying to figure out. And I look back on my career at all of the technology transformations that I have been a part of and that Microsoft has driven, and they just get faster and faster in terms of the wave that they hit you, but not really in terms of the wave that they get adopted, right? And then I look at my children. My daughter's 27, my son is 23, and they are facing one of the hardest job markets that we've ever had, at least in my lifetime. And a lot of it is because AI is shifting what was entry-level positions, and I've found myself trying to help them redefine their value and even go into interviews to help the interviewers redefine what they're looking for, so that they see the value of the human side of what my children have to offer, rather than what technology has already taken away from those jobs. So I think we're at a really pivotal time where we have a lot to work through over the next decade, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
Thank you, and it's exciting to be part of such an esteemed panel. So today's panel isn't really a technical conversation. We won't be talking about large language models or ChatGPT. We're here to talk about what it actually means to be human in a world where AI is increasingly doing things that only humans used to be able to do. So I'd like to start off and ask a question to Gabriela. So Gabriela, you've spent 3 decades watching technology transform enterprises from the inside. So what do you feel like is so different this time outside of the speed that you mentioned? What are the companies you work with actually experiencing right now that they weren't expecting?
Unlike many technology transformations, there's a pressure on every business to figure out how they're going to transform with technology. There is a real pressure on the CEO, on their boards, and on their executive teams to figure out what they are going to do differently and to accelerate that. And most technology transformations have not occurred from that kind of tops-down pressure. And in some cases, what that has done is it's created almost an artificial view of like, oh, maybe I could just use AI here and then I can talk to the board or my shareholders about it and it'll be all good. And so I think that's one of the big differences in the adoption. I think the other is that the hacker community has adopted AI much faster than the organizations themselves, and it's created a whole lot of vulnerabilities for organizations. And so there's a huge unknown around that, and I think that is a very scary thing for the organization to figure out how do we adopt but safeguard at the same time. And many technology companies are coming out with all these AI agents to do stuff. And there's not any standards body or reviews on, are those agents doing the right thing, accessing the right information, going to the right places, and are they not creating vulnerabilities? And if you get too many agents doing stuff within your organization and there's not that level of oversight and governance, then how are you going to catch those things? And so I think those are some of the things that I have seen happening that's very different about this technology than in other technologies.
Thanks for that, Gabriella. So Gabriella mentioned the pressure that these companies are experiencing. Ken, you've been imagining the future for a while now through your novels. And your latest novel is set in a near future where AI is woven into everyday life. First of all, did you anticipate that pressure for AI to get woven into everyday life? And then what does it feel like to be a novelist who imagines that future and have it happening before your eyes?
Thank you for that. It's the self-serving answer will be, yes, I saw this coming, right? That's the kind of thing novelists would say, and that's why you should never trust novelists when they say things like that. But I will say that I did see it, but probably not for the reasons many of you think. So I spent many years working as a litigation consultant, essentially an expert witness in patent, trade secret, copyright cases, analyzing technology and thinking about the history of technology. So I have a historian's view of what's happening to us in this moment. And I would say that the roots of this current moment are actually very deep. They shouldn't surprise us. And the reason I say that is because the logic of modernity and modern capitalism has been pushing towards this moment for a very long time. I would say that one of the fundamental features of the modern economy is to turn humans into components of a machine. Over and over again, we see the move to take discretionary decision-making power away from workers and to reduce human workers into components of a machine. That is what mass production was about, and that is how office work has been structured. If you work in a call center providing service, what they really want from you is your linguistic ability. They do not want you to make decisions. You must follow a script, and you cannot exercise empathy. In fact, they train that out of you as much as they can. The goal is to make you into a machine. If you're working in a warehouse, again, the goal is to make you into a machine. You do what the algorithm tells you to do. You go here, the machine has plotted out how many seconds it takes you to walk. You do exactly what the machine tells you to do. Now, having laid the groundwork for that kind of thing for 100 years, it's obvious that under the logic of capital, labor is just there to supply something called intelligence, but divorced from the human capacity to make decisions. So the minute that intelligence becomes something that machines can exercise, again, devoid of decision-making power, of course they're going to do it. When the entire point is to just utilize your ability to understand language and your ability to navigate a space, then yes, you can be replaced as a worker. That is the logic of this entire system. So we shouldn't be surprised. We have been treating humans as machines for 100 years and moving towards that direction. So when this technology comes in, that is what they're going to do. So in that context, you can also see the solution for it. The solution for it, of course, is for us to emphasize the ways we need to be human. I've often said that the problem with the age of AI is not that humans will be replaced by machines, because we've been doing that since forever. We've been turning humans into machines. The real problem is humans starting to treat each other as machines. We must resist that as much as possible. And this manifests itself in all kinds of ways, right? Take civic debate. What happens to civic debate in this age of deepfakes and AI manipulation? I am not so much worried about the fact that people might take fake videos as real. I'm much more concerned about the way we default to accusing those who disagree with us as bots. Think of a very famous politician, a leader of one of the major parties, who, when told that young people, young voters in her party are very concerned about the Palestinian cause, her answer was, they're just Russian bots. This is what I'm worried about. When people start to treat each other as machines and to dismiss them on the grounds that they may be AI and therefore I don't need to treat them seriously, that is the moment we have to be fearful of and push back on.
So we had Gabriella talk about, nice moment. We had Gabriella talk about the pressure and the governance needed at the enterprise. Ken is talking about the importance of remembering our humanity in these online discussions and reducing the human to just a cog in the wheel, a little shadow of Taylorism, a remnant of Taylorism. So Sheila, you have operated at the policy level across governments and the World Economic Forum, and now through Project Liberty. So what do you feel like is the most important thing that organizations are not talking about in mainstream AI conversations?
What a great question. Well, I'll take it out of the policy realm, because the one thing I will depressingly reveal, which is no big reveal, is that I do not think that policymakers are having super sophisticated conversations about this topic, and we'll just kind of leave that. We can go into that in more detail about why that might be, which is a systems problem, but let's leave that aside. I think that there's a lot of discussion happening right now on workforce displacement, reskilling. You saw the very dramatic announcement by Jack Dorsey that he was laying off 40% of Block, and he was shifting the entire model of the workforce at his company or that company into being that the AI was the driver and the humans were the interceders in the process versus the other. He's not looking to create, and I'm paraphrasing this poorly, you should look it up, but he's not looking to create, he's not wanting to use AI to make human workflows more efficient. He wants to use humans to provide context to the AI. Right, so it's a fundamental refashioning, and I can tell you he is being the most outspoken about that, and he's taken the steps to do that, but that is hardly an uncommon conversation in Silicon Valley and other places that are tech capital centers. But I want to follow on one thing that Ken said, because the first full-time job I had out of law school, was at a big white shoe law firm, and I was doing corporate M&A. Okay, and the thing about that is even if you're a first-year associate at some of these big firms, you're in the boardroom when the decisions are being made about what to do. And I can tell you that the dehumanization of the workforce is not a technical phenomenon, because when you are doing a gigantic multi-billion-dollar or trillion-dollar merger, let me tell you that people are a budget line. Okay, and the number one consideration is how do we sever? What's ERISA? Like it's just numbers in the budget. Nobody at that level is considering at all the cost, the societal cost, or the externalities around what might happen with mass force layoffs or whatever else it is. And the same thing is true in PE. It's true everywhere. So technology might be an accelerant of that dehumanization, but it is something that has historically been the case for as long as mergers or acquisitions or anything like that has been happening, or whatever, or even dissolutions of companies or whatnot. And so even though I think there is a very robust conversation happening about labor and workforce within companies, enterprises, which makes its way up to the policy level and to policymakers as an area of acute pending crisis, I'm not sure it's the right conversation, because when you really get into what's happening in those boardrooms, some of which I still advise and sit in on, it still is a budget line conversation more than anything else. And the budget line discussion is always going to trend to what I will perhaps unfairly call the Jack Dorsey view, because that is always going to be cheaper because you don't have to account what you pay for when you pay for AI as a company or as an enterprise. You pay for the service. You don't pay for all the energy and everything else that goes into that service, right? So you're not absorbing it's a new externality that you don't have to absorb. So unless there is some policy engine and so this is where I'm getting a long-winded way to get to your question, I think what's being missed and the most important policy conversation is making those energy costs and all the other costs, compute, everything else, transparent, and having that be embedded in real costs around these transformations. Right? Because if that were the case, I expect that Jack would have made a different decision. If he had to suddenly account for all the costs that extra use of AI was going to cause, let's call it society, and cost society, if he had to absorb some of that, it might be a different decision. So now I'm not necessarily suggesting a policy intervention there. It's a complicated conversation. And as we all know, energy and geopolitics are, we didn't know that before, we sure know it now, are intricately tied to each other, right? AI, energy and chips and all of that is all kind of one conversation. That there has to be a reckoning, and I think a whole cost reckoning of what this is actually doing to the workforce that is beyond just the sort of four corners of a corporate, budget conversation that's happening now.
Sheila, if I can just follow up on what you said, which is an excellent point. I feel that moment of reckoning is coming, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys saw the news, but a shoe company called Allbirds, which used to make these shoes that were very popular in Silicon Valley, just pivoted to becoming an AI company. That is not a healthy economy, okay? When shoe companies think that they should jump into the AI game, something is deeply wrong. The fact that a company like OpenAI can, argue with journalists and say, we're only going to lose about $140 billion, not 300, and somehow this is supposed to be good news, is insanity, right? None of these companies are actually making money. All of them are doing what they're doing and enabling the kind of layoffs you're talking about because investors are just financing this kind of ridiculous overexpansion. So a crash is coming. It is coming. So the reckoning is going to be here. Capitalism will take care of this issue. However, if I can just point this out, that does not mean all this AI stuff is just going to disappear and go away. In the same way that we had the internet bubble, yes, the bubble happened and the crash happened, but our lives are fundamentally transformed. This is going to be like that. There will be a moment of reckoning, but lives are still going to be changed. We just have to be thinking very carefully, again, about what is going to happen forward, who are going to be the real winners, and how can this technology that supposedly will transform everything, how is it actually going to change things? We still have to figure out how to remain human regardless of, if the crash happens or
I'll just say that when I read the Allbirds story, I was reminded of this moment. I think it was 2018 when I was doing press at the World Economic Forum about crypto and blockchain, and that was when we were still talking about blockchain, not crypto. That was the dynamic, and that was the time this company came out that was called the Long Island Iced Tea Blockchain Company. Okay. And that's even more comical than Allbirds AI, in my opinion, because having had Allbirds, right, like having had Allbirds for a while, I love those shoes, actually. I was kind of like, oh, there's a product there, right? But it was this moment of just absurdity, of comic absurdity, where I think a lot of us were like, oh, God, like the bubble has, clearly. And so I've actually been giving trainings, if you want to call them that, on like, how do we learn lessons from what happened with the blockchain industry? Because it was not inevitable, and it still isn't inevitable, by the way. The story's not being done written, that turned into like a casino of horrors. And AI, like we're at a moment where there's a direction this is going to go, and we're all shaping that in real time, right? Markets are shaping that, policy is shaping that. And I'm concerned that we're just going to see the same story that we saw happen with the crypto and blockchain industry, because it's literally some of the same people, and I mean that like it's the same people, okay, who are there, who are now here. It's the same investors, some of the same builders. They all know each other, and they are learning lessons from the successes that they see of the crypto industry in certain ways in terms of financial returns, and trying to replicate that in AI, and that is not a societally beneficial approach. Ask me how I know. So.
Thanks for that, Sheila. Gabriella, we're sitting up here and we're talking about the human side of AI, which includes potentially great displacement. The World Economic Forum estimates, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it's something like 72 million jobs will go away with AI, but another 98 or so million will be created. My question to you is, who bears the responsibility for that retraining, for that upskilling? Is it the corporations who lay off 72 million people and then have to rely on other people to retrain the 98 million? Or do you feel like that's the discussion that should be happening in the boardrooms, and that the corporations should be taking on that responsibility?
I don't know that that's an either or. I think that one of a really high expense that organizations carry is the expense of recruiting, hiring, onboarding, and retaining talent. And so those organizations that are realistically looking at each of the roles in their organization and encouraging the people who know what's going on the best, the people who are actually doing the job, encouraging them and compensating them. We were talking about this before we came in here, to find ways to adopt AI, to embrace AI in their jobs, and pivot what they do so that they're focused on the things they do really well, and maybe away from technical tasks or repetitive tasks or things that AI can do for them. Those organizations are going to be in a much better place because they won't have to go out and find that talent. I mean, they already have talent. And so in that sense, I think they are incented to do that retraining and to redefine those roles together, because when they do that with their employees will be more engaged and will embrace it more. Back at the beginning of the industrial age, you think of all the jobs that got replaced, and there was a crisis. And it took a while to recalibrate what it meant to do those jobs in an age where things were industrialized. And we are on the verge of going through that now. And so I think it is incumbent on everyone. It's incumbent on the education system to start embracing AI in the education system so that students understand what it can do for them and how they can exercise their power as humans to really make the AI better and make whatever they're doing better. And then it goes all the way up through, I think that there should be government programs that help people through retraining and training. And I think that the private sector has a huge responsibility to do that as well, so that we don't face kind of a collapse of the economy as we make this shift where we displace millions of people who have so much to offer, but just in a different way.
Thank you for that. So I feel like one of the durable skills you were alluding to was creativity. And Ken, I want to direct this one to you because your livelihood is essentially an act of expressing what it means to be creative. When AI can write a story that makes someone cry, have we redefined what creativity is, or just automated the appearance of creativity?
I mean, this is a very difficult question, actually, to answer. It parallels the debate over what intelligence is, right? I mean, if you look at the history of artificial intelligence, it's one of moving goalposts, right? Initially, people thought it requires intelligence to play chess, and when computers totally solve that problem, our reaction is, that's not intelligence. At one point, we thought having a conversation was a sign of intelligence. And now that more people think ChatGPT is more human than actual humans, we say, that's not intelligence. So we keep on doing that, right? But capital doesn't care. I mean, it used to require intelligence to learn how to program a computer, and now computers can do that better than humans, some humans. It seems that we have decided to call that not intelligence either. So I feel like creativity is similar, right? The sort of things that computers can do now, e.g., compose a poem, a sestina, about Bitcoin. At one point, I think if you said, can someone do that? And the answer will be, wow, if you can do that, you're a pretty creative person. These days, ChatGPT can do that way faster and better than humans can. And we sort of look at it and say, that's not really being creative. So I think it's one of those things where whenever the computers can do it, we say it's not creative. So I don't think that's the most useful question to ask. What I want to ask instead is, what do we want out of art? When we consume art, what are we really looking for? So my view is this. I think there's no doubt that computers will take over some of the functions of entertainment and art that humans now do. And there's a specific category of such uses where machines will do better than humans. Let me give you an example. So there's something I think about a lot, which is if you navigate fan fiction communities a lot, you often see the situation where somebody posts and says, I really want to read a fanfic featuring this kind of main character, usually a character, a Mary Sue, right? Who's like the person asking. And I want to see these ships. I want to see these kind of conflicts. I want the result to be like this. I want these to be the keywords that the story strikes. Can someone recommend me a fanfic like that? Or write me a fanfic like that? And a lot of times, these desires, these yearnings go unfulfilled. Now, whatever else you think AI is, today's generative models are desire fulfillment machines. So these are what I call Scheherazade novels. I think machines will write those. There's no way, unless you're a king, to demand a novelist to drop everything and write the thing that you want them to write. I mean, in Stephen King's Misery, that's exactly what Annie did, right? Annie kidnaps Paul for him to do that. Most of us will never be able to do that, nor do we want to. But now here's ChatGPT who's happy to do that for you. ChatGPT will be your Scheherazade. You will be able to read the thing you wanted to read, the thing that fulfills your desires. Would you call that creative? I don't know, maybe. But the point is, there will be a market for that sort of thing. But at the same time, we also read, not because we want to fulfill a desire, but because we don't know what we want. I read novels sometimes because I want to be surprised. I want to start this novel that seems to be based on a premise I've heard 100 times, But I know it's going to be different because the author is someone I know, and I know she's going to surprise me. R.F. Kuang, who is a friend of mine, is like that. She often writes in genres that seem established. And you're like, okay, she's going to do something like this. What does that mean? And you go and read it, and you realize she has completely subverted your expectations. Whatever she writes is going to be her thing, and she will surprise you. And she will give you what you didn't even know you wanted. As a novelist myself, I know that's what drives me. I mean, when I wrote my big epic fantasy story, one of the things I wanted to add in there was this bit where essentially in a fantasy world, they're going to do an Iron Chef competition. It seems such a stupid idea, and a lot of readers are like, this is the dumbest thing ever. But plenty of readers came to me afterwards and said, I had no idea I wanted that. Thank you. That is what I wanted. That's what humans can do. That's also a kind of creativity. And because these models are trained to be midwits, meaning they're there to fulfill the most averaging of desires, okay? I do not believe these models will do that. These models are not trained to do the surprising thing. In fact, they're trained as hard as they can to not do the surprising thing, because surprising things will generate newspaper headlines and bring bad publicity to their creators. They are very, very good politicians, and politicians are not smart or creative. So, I'm not worried about it. I think machines will fulfill desires, and novelists will go on to do what we do. And I think there will be room for both, because people yearn for both.
So the pie gets bigger, just as we saw with when we put a camera on it in everybody's hands and give everybody video. So there's a statement out there that says AI can change who does what, and I think you were alluding to that. The machines now can create these novels on demand. Sheila, Gabriella, what is your reaction to that statement?
I think it's been proven true, and so I'm not a computer scientist or an engineer by training, but I vibe code things, right, that I couldn't do without AI, because that capacity is now available to me. Not everyone I know is an editor, and they're using AI to edit, things they're writing, right? So I think there are some functions, let's call them, leaving aside the professional, ramifications of that, but there are some functions I think are being done that used to be done by humans that are now being outsourced to some degree to AI, and that is provably true. I think the question that Ken addressed so beautifully is like, is there a boundary on that, right? So certainly when it comes to things like synthesis of information, numerical analysis, all these kinds of things, those are pretty well baked into a lot of systems already, right? Even sort of rudimentary pattern matching, I think it all depends on the quality of the query that the AI is asked, of course, and the context that's provided. Otherwise you get just absurd and sometimes hilarious hallucinations, but you can do a lot of that synthesis and analysis already within these systems. So again, I think the real fundamental question is the one that was previously discussed, which is something in the realm of creativity, or that sort of initiation, the instantiation or initiation of the workflow that the AI is doing is still human-derived. That is also changing. There are some ways in which AI can generate its own queries now and can be self-referential, which is exciting but also scary for many of us, I think, in terms of what the implications are for our jobs and careers.
Yeah, AI democratizes a lot, right? And it enables people who have cool ideas but didn't know anything about, say, software development to create applications on those cool ideas. And so in that sense, it has shifted the power of where that can be done. And I think there's going to be more and more of those kinds of examples. It democratizes, in some sense, creativity. It democratizes, in some sense, intelligence. It puts it into everybody's hands and the ability to do that. And so then it's kind of incumbent on all of us as consumers of that to find the part of that is unique to us, that is unique to our humanness, and take advantage of that democratization, and then fashion it and shape it in a way that we still come forth through that. And so, yeah, it will shift and change a lot. It will take a lot longer than everybody is saying that it will, to actually do that. We always think that technology is just going to do stuff really fast, and it doesn't. And it's really not even as good enough to do that yet. But it will. And people who look at it and say, wow, what an opportunity, are going to find new and incredible ways to build things for our world that they could never have imagined doing before. And so I have a lot of optimism and a lot of confidence that maybe we can solve a lot of the problems that we have today, because we will have even more intelligence and creativity at it than we had before.
That's such a nice thought. So Sheila, back to you. Right now, the people building the most capable AI systems are also the people who are setting the rules for how those systems are used. What does real accountability look like, and who enforces it?
I think this is the question of the time. It's certainly where I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about this. And I don't actually think that this is solely or strictly or even primarily a policy question, which I think is an important thing to note. I think it is a systems question. And so right now, it is true, right? Like, a lot of what people understand about AI is marketing and PR material that comes out of people who are true experts, that is true, but they're also self-proclaimed experts to some extent as well, right? And the belief that we give and trust we give some of these people, I think it goes as far as the belief and trust we give technology in general, depending on who we are, and these individuals themselves, which is why every time any of them, takes a step out of line, you get so much press about it, and the attention is really there, because everyone's trying to gauge how much can we trust these individuals. I would argue there is no individual in that kind of position that we should trust, no matter how much integrity or character or anything they've demonstrably had or have not had, because that is a designed to fail kind of way of assigning responsibility, because they're never going to assign it to themselves the way that they really ought to, and the way that we would want. I think we, speaking in the broadest sense of the word as a society, would want that accountability to be had. So I'll answer the question kind of in a bit of a self-serving way, which is one of the things that I'm working on, is something that we're calling proof of control, which is basically an attestation, either a technical attestation or something that is a process that can be audited by an external party that demonstrates that at significant moments, whatever those are, it's very context dependent, a human was in the loop, it was intervening in some fashion or making a critical decision. I was on a panel earlier with Sofia Romansky, who actually was the author of this wonderful guide that came out about defense systems, and basically made the recommendation that at any moment before release of a weapon, for example, a human must be the decision maker, and you have to audit that is the case. And I don't think that is exclusive or should be to the military. I think that should be something we consider in a lot of contexts, right? Now, again, we imagine ultimately there'll be some kind of certification sort of process. Not everything needs a platinum level certification. Some things maybe you don't need a certification for because you're pretty comfortable with the AI deciding for itself. For other things, you're really uncomfortable. And I suspect as we get further along, where the autonomy of an AI is more and more advanced, and I agree with Gabriela, we're not really as close to that as I think some people are saying. We're actually quite far from that, but we are in the process of getting there, right? So well in advance of that realization or that moment, we ought to have systems of accountability that at a minimum are creating those loops so that we understand where accountability lies. Now, the other thing I want to say about this is an early mistake that I was talking a lot about in the blockchain system. So people who work in blockchain, one of the things touted all the time was, it's transparent. A transparent record is better by default than a non-transparent record or an opaque record. And I was like, well, it depends, right? Transparency by itself does not lead to accountability. period. Like, it's such an important, I can't say, I've said it like 100 times. It's so important to understand that. You need a governance system, a process, a determination of what is and is not in bounds, right? All of those rules have to be decided. Otherwise, the transparency is useless. It's
Sheila,
just a
if
lot
I
of
can
noise.
give
Yeah.
you an example,
Yeah.
our current administration is very transparent about corruption.
That's
that
right.
means nothing.
That's exactly right, right? I love it. Exactly right. So transparency is not the goal, it's not the end state. It's a step in a process towards accountability. But without governance, and I say this with my lawyer hat on, like I'm a governance nerd, I have been for 25 years. Without a system of governance that creates that accountability, without external parties and external pressures that are going to trigger that accountability, right? Without consequences for actions that are taken or not taken, the systems are kind of meaningless. And so another example I'll give, and I think this is a very complicated, I do not agree with the popular, I think, way this is being perceived. You recently had these cases in LA that were decided against social media companies, right? And they were holding them accountable. And a lot of the response has been, oh, you know, the jury verdict was too low, it's not gonna cause a change. As a lawyer, I completely disagree, because what has happened is there's been a theory of the case that has prevailed. And so now product liability theory, I'll get a bit technical legally, can be used to hold software companies accountable. That is massive development. And if you look at the history of reproductive rights in this country, you know, you get a foot in the door and, you know, 15 years later, Roe is gone. Okay, so this is the foot in the door that's going to create a lot of accountability. There is a reason that Meta is fighting this teeny tiny to them verdict tooth and nail, because they know that this is the first step. So like I say, that's a system where the accountability is starting to be created through a novel legal theory, but there are other ways of doing that ex ante, and that's certainly true with AI.
And if I can just jump in for a second, I think one of the things that we have to be incredibly wary of is that we should have diverse people creating and engaging in the development of these models. Because if we don't, we will have incredible bias in all of those models, and we will be missing a huge amount of humanity, and we will think it is correct, and it is way off because it has not had the representation in building it that is needed. And so I think that's something that we should all demand, we should focus on. There should be more governance in this particular climate. I think it is disruptive and disturbing that it is not going to have that kind of governance and oversight to make sure it happens. And so that is something that really scares me.
So without governance, without accountability, these systems can potentially run amok. And my guess is, Ken, as a novelist, you've thought about some of these scenarios. Like, are we just living out the story that you've already thought of? And if so, how does the story end?
Okay, so I'll give a very brief answer because I don't think I'm actually the most qualified person to answer this. I want to defer to Sheila and Gabriella on this. Novelists are, okay, so I'll say this. It's often thought that science fiction writers are supposed to warn people about dystopias or whatever. I actually don't really think that's true at all. I think science fiction authors are very good at channeling anxieties of the moment. We're not any more foresightful than anyone else. We're normal people. We don't know what the future is, but we're very attuned to what the collective unconscious is. I mean, that's where art comes from. Art doesn't come from the outside, it comes from the inside. We delve into the collective unconscious in that Jungian sense. We channel the anxieties around all of us. I mean, a good example of this sort of thing is Frankenstein, right? When Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, she was channeling the anxieties of her moment about science, about industrialization, about the end of empire, and all the rest of it. And she channeled all of that when inside the collective unconscious as a young woman, like many of the students here, same age. She went in there and came back with a monster, the creature. And the creature is so beautiful and so powerful because now the creature has become part of our collective unconscious, our modern mythology. We can no longer think about technology without invoking the creature. every time we talk about technology, the creature is there as a ghost, as a mythological presence that we think about. In fact, if you haven't read Frankenstein for a while, go back and read it. It's incredibly prescient and interesting from a large language model point of view. You may not remember this, but the creature was born without language, and the creature had to learn language essentially by observing and being trained on human linguistic data from a family he was hiding and living next to, and that family was reading Paradise Lost. Now, Mary Shelley is the ultimate of nerds. I love her, because the idea that the creature will learn language and human society and human cognition from Paradise Lost, that is just chef's kiss. But that's how the creature did it. The creature acquired language like a large language model, just absorbing it, being trained on Milton, and then everything is, a mythology about a retelling of Paradise Lost. So that's what we science fiction writers do. We are myth makers. We delve into the current moment and retrieve mythologies. Now, in terms of concrete things that you're asking about, I'm going to defer to the real experts.
Well, we are moving into our Q&A portion. So as we do that, I'd invite you to think about your questions and write them down. We've certainly got a few to go through. As you're doing that, I'd love to do just a quick round of wrap out from each of you. And Gabrielle, we'll work your way and work this way. You know what I meant. So if you could get everyone in this room to do one thing differently as a result of this conversation, what would it be?
Embrace AI. Look at the things that you do every day and see what challenge it. What could you have it do for you so that it would free you up to do more of the things you love and more of the things you're good at?
Pay attention to, well, everything, I would say. It's a time to pay attention, but to how you're using AI and how you're not using AI. And so one provocation that I tend to offer is, if everyone used AI only the way you use it, and could only use it the way you use it, what would be gained and what would be lost? And I do this exercise because I find it powerful to help me think, what parts of my brain am I offloading, and how is that good or bad? And sometimes it's both, and sometimes it's neither, but it's a helpful exercise.
My advice is to reverse the advice you're often given on how to use AI. So sometimes you're told, right, that you can use AI to help you brainstorm. Like, you can type in the thing that you're trying to think about and have AI give you some ideas. I want you to reverse that, which is to have the AI prompt you rather than the other way around. So when you're trying to brainstorm, have the AI ask you questions and push you and interrogate your assumptions and see what happens to push you to be more human.
I love that. Expand your capabilities, be mindful of how you're using it, and use AI to provoke your creativity and to surface it. Wonderful questions, or wonderful observations. So the first question I have here says, I've noticed that generative AI creates more pressure for perfectionism. If intelligent organized creation versus human creativity for that requires a messy, iterative process. So I think what we're getting at here is, striving for perfectionism versus being messy and creative and iterative. If this lack of mess and increased perfectionism from AI leading humans to have less patience and compassion for self and others?
Well, so if we start from the end of that question, go backwards, I would say I think a lot of technology is leading people to have less patience for everything. And they, you look at our younger and younger generations, and they want immediate satisfaction, and they want to get things done, and they don't understand what could possibly take time. And so, yes, I do. And so what does that tell us? It tells us we have to teach people to be more patient, and we have to teach people to really be more considerate and thoughtful, and that is one of those human talents that we need more of in people. Does it drive for perfectionism or take away that iterative nature? I guess only if we let it. I mean, it can help us. I mean, it certainly, it helps me do more iteration, right? I was preparing a keynote, and so I had the ideas of what I wanted to do, and I put in an outline, and I said, what are the directions that I could go with this, and give me some sources of historical data that I could add into this. And it came back, and it was a whole thing, and I was like, okay, more of this, less of this. Let me think about that. And then we had another one, and I was able to iterate and iterate and iterate to get to something that I felt like, yes, this is what I meant. This is what I really want to talk about. So, I mean, I think it's a lot of like how you use it can help you really even do more iterations than you did before, because you can do them more quickly. When you're thinking about solving a problem, when you're thinking about doing analytics, I think it helps you do more and more of those iterations that you couldn't possibly have done before. When I think about, geneticism, I think it helps us get to things to iterate on things that we never could have iterated on in a lifetime. And so it's all very dependent.
So this is a related question. I feel like it's related. Regarding defining humanity, there's research to suggest with increased power, some humans are displaying less human or humane thinking. And the question is there a case for AI-generated humane guardrails for humans who've lost their humanity?
I mean, I'll say I hope so, right? I guess the irony is I don't think anybody who would require that kind of intervention is going to look to AI or anywhere for that matter for it. And so there'd have to be some sort of cueing that's happening externally to that individual that is forcing or prompting that intervention to happen. Because I think in most such cases, the fundamental problem is a lack of self-awareness, right? Yeah, I'm trying to think of a reason why you couldn't see that kind of prompting or encouragement or incentive creation. But I think it would, again, I mean, we're in a moment where you get, to some extent, you get out of AI what you put in and what you're seeking. So without the seeking, impulse, I don't know that, practically speaking, you'd get that kind of outcome. But like I say, I certainly hope that would be, I can think of some people we might want to, some test guinea pig models we might throw in there, right?
So I think this one we could have each of you answer, which there's a couple of questions around this. What are the durable human skills that rise above AI? Ken, let's start with you.
No.
Oh.
Everyone, go ahead.
All right.
I think about adaptability. I think about resilience. I think about being able to really connect and collaborate and bring out the best in others. I think about those things as some of those elements that are uniquely human, and I struggle to figure out how AI could do those things for someone. I actually put it into much more concrete, I think about teachers, right? There's a whole lot of what teachers do, AI can do. But what teachers can't do is really reach out to a student and help them find the thing that they do best, and nurture that, right? I think about a doctor, right? AI can do a lot of what a doctor can do between AI and machines, but they can't truly sit down with someone and help them to reform their path towards a disease, or figure out how they're going to run their life in a different way. knowing that that's what they're facing. So there's a human side of all of these things that if we focus our energy on those things, then the world would be a better place, actually, because those are the people that you'd be interacting with who would be more people, right? Like what a teacher has been reduced to today, it takes away from their opportunity to be able to do that with students. What a doctor has been reduced to today takes away from their opportunity to do that with their patients. And so if we can give that back to them, then we give back a whole side of humanity that we have lost.
So, controversial possibly opinion, I hope not. The best, most important, most instructive show on television right now is The Pit. Okay, I watch every episode multiple times. I think there are two kinds of people in the world, those who watch every episode multiple times and those who have yet to see the show, okay? It is the most human, life-affirming thing I have ever borne witness to at a perfect moment in American and global history. So, but what it leads me to answer the question, now that I've made a pitch, which I should probably start charging for because I do it all the time, is that I think the answer is compassion. And I distinguish that from empathy. I think AI can actually evince empathy, and it does it fairly regularly. Sometimes it's cringe-worthy empathy, right? But let's remember, AI has not had any lived experience, okay? So when AI is like, I hear you, that's really hard, it's like, what the hell are you talking about? You have no idea. That's crazy, right?
That's brilliant.
It's brilliant, actually, right? But it's not true, okay, in a lived experience way. And even beyond empathy is compassion. And to me, I distinguish because compassion is not just saying, I hear you, I feel you, I resonate with what you're experiencing. It's, I'm here with you, right? And we are together in this, okay? And I think there's a feeling that AI can evoke that's like that, but it is no substitute for actual compassion. Like when you've taken a friend through a hard time, or you yourself have been helped through a hard time, or you see your child struggling, or whatever it is, I think that is something uniquely unique. And to go back to the first part of my response to the question, that is something you see, and on The Pit, a huge differentiator in the characters and part of their growth arcs is expression of compassion, and when that is hard to find in times of stress or times of chaos or whatever it is, how to find that within yourself is something that humans have an impulse to do, some of us more than others, for sure. But AI doesn't necessarily, can't evince that in a realistic or lived experience way.
Those are all great answers, and I think my answer is along the same lines. The whole advent of generative AI has forced me to ask the question of what makes us human over and over again. And it's interesting, right? At one point, we used to think that the thing that distinguishes us as humans is our cognitive ability, our intelligence, however we want to define that. So, humans are the only species that can prove math theorems and all the rest of it. But in this moment when AI can come up with new math theorems and prove them, that's very strange. It's making me rethink all of these questions, how we used to think intelligence and consciousness are actually the same thing. I mean, that's what the Turing test was all about. And now we're forced to recognize that intelligence and consciousness are actually not the same thing at all. And once intelligence has been embodied in a machine, we don't seem to think it's all that special anymore. I think that's actually a really potent moment that deserves to be lingered on a little bit. We have been pursuing thinking machines forever. And within the last half a decade, we got to the point where machines can pass the bar exam and talk to you about your relationships and come up with new research topics. And we're all just sort of shrugging and saying, who cares? That's wild. I don't think most science fiction authors ever imagined that would happen. But that is our collective reaction. We're all just sort of like, who cares? I mean, there's so many YouTube skits about how, the way we talked to AI back in 2020 is totally different from today. Back then it was like, oh my God, you're so amazing. And today it's like, go back and do it better. So I think about what are the moments when we feel most human? Right? Think to your own experience. What are the moments you felt most human? Is it a moment where you solve some difficult problem and you're just like, oh, I'm so smart? Is it? Or is it a moment where you're like, I'm actually able to exercise my own compassion and do something that I'm proud of and no one's watching? how cool, I'm actually a human being? Or is it a moment where you're just sort of sitting there and saying, the universe is incredibly beautiful, and I got put here for 70 years, and I got to have this moment. Wow, what a moment. You know, are those the moments when you felt most human? So think about what makes you feel most human and try to amplify those moments and try to make those the center of your existence, the things you will remember.
We do a not so good job of making corporate stakeholders pay for actual externalities and their failures. When we have this huge level of potential, societal level risks, how do we get companies with the biggest potential gains to offset those risks?
I mean, thus far it's been threat of litigation, which is not only too far after the fact, right? And in the interim period where you have, like, I'll just use the social media cases again as an example, in the time period when you had the plaintiff set that got pulled together, a class action that got pulled together, a lawsuit that got filed, depositions that happened, you know, the hearings, the jury verdict, that harm was still happening that entire time, right? And so that's the challenge with that. But that's how we've historically done it. We've done it through insurance rate hikes. That's been something we've done. We've kind of forced insurance reckoning right through those costs, which are, again, nominal compared to what the real externality costs are. Look, I think this is a question that is going to require a multifaceted approach. It's going to require governance, it's going to require policy, a lot of these things. We have to make a decision, though, collectively, I think, right? And there's probably going to be some democracy involved in that and voting involved in that and, you know, putting people in positions of authority and power in our political system that can create some of this accountability, because it's not going to happen organically. There is zero incentive for a corporation to absorb these costs, which is why they don't do it, right? So I think it's an important question to be asked. I don't have a good answer to it, but I can kind of give you the history on how we've tended to cause this, and it usually comes with these big ticket litigation moments that happen, you know, 50 years into a harm that has been established and is well known before accountability is actually created.
I mean, yeah, organization has to see some benefit to them to do something. And so it's about what would be their incentive to take responsibility or to feed the fund or to do job retraining or whatever it is that they are responsible or should be responsible to do. In our economy, there has to be something that benefits them in order to get them to do that, other than just suing them, right? And so I think the question is to try and figure out, like, okay, so what do we think that all of those costs are going to be, and then how can we start to campaign back to the private sector to own some of those costs in a way that's beneficial to them and position that in a way that's beneficial to them to do that.
So more on this also is there was a concept for a time, well, so the concept still exists, it's just fallen out of favor in the current climate, called stakeholder capitalism. And the idea there was that your shareholders were but one constituency that you were accountable to. You were also accountable to your customers, to your employees, to the planet, you know, whatever. And depending on the context, like, you kind of picked this broader set. And related to this was actually the field of impact investing. So I was an early lawyer in the room when a lot of those conversations around how to create this, it's called double or triple bottom line, you know, capital and returns, where you accepted as an investor a diminished, to some extent, you know, not by a lot necessarily, financial return in favor of demonstrable social returns, right? And so you could show, okay, X number of lives saved or X number of, you know, climate disasters averted or whatever it was, and in exchange we got maybe a little bit, like 5% less financial return or whatever, and people made that choice very consciously and very deliberately. And if anything, there's still a field it's being recast now because, again, it's fallen out of vogue and, you know, it takes I would say, an unnecessary and ridiculous amount of courage to stick to those guns right now, unfortunately. But like I say, now, you know, I think the conversations have shifted in a lot of boardrooms back to my only responsibility is to my shareholders, period, full stop, that's it, period. Not to my longest standing employees, not to my co-founder, not to my, not to my whoever it is. Like, that's my job. And when you see CEOs get ousted, it's often because a board has determined, or the shareholders have threatened a suit or whatever, such that that CEO is not acting in a way that is prioritizing solely and exclusively now. It used to be not primarily, prioritizing shareholders. Now it's that there's some distracting thing that is pulling their attention away from the shareholder responsibility. I think that is a very sad development. I think there will be backlash against that development over time. I think you're seeing sort of the court of public opinion create shaming moments, for certain CEOs that are acting in this way. I think there is an instinctive ick everybody feels about that being that way, but that is the incentive structure that exists right now.
Thank you so much. I want to thank each and every member of the panel. What strikes me about this conversation is the question that we started with, which is, what does it mean to be human in this age of AI? It didn't get any simpler over the last hour, but it did get more interesting, which I think is exactly what you want from a great panel. So thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you.
And thank you so much. This has been the session, Humanity in Innovation, Navigating Life in the Age of AI, part of the 2026 Conference on World Affairs at CU Boulder. Thank you again for being here.